Commander Sarah Chen had witnessed executions, planetary bombardments, and the cold vacuum of space claim lives in seconds. But nothing had prepared her for the sight of a child being judged unworthy of existence. The great hall of the Varikesh Council trembled with the assembled weight of 1,000 years of tradition, its crystalline walls refracting light into sharp angles that cut across the stone floor, where a small figure stood alone. And Sarah felt her breath catch as she watched the smallest cub she had ever seen barely reaching her knee struggle to hold his head high while 7 hooded figures above him prepared to seal his fate. His fur was the color of starlight on water, silver gray and shimmering. But where his siblings would grow to become the massive, powerful warriors the Varikesh were known for across 3 systems, little Koreth stood thin and trembling. His bones too delicate, his frame too slight, his voice too soft to howl the war cries that echoed in his blood. Sarah's hands clenched at her sides, her dress uniform suddenly feeling like a collar around her throat. As High Arbiter Lyara raised one clawed hand and spoke the words that would condemn a 6-year-old to exile or worse, the bloodline must remain pure, Lyara's voice rolled through the chamber like distant thunder. And those who cannot serve the pack must be cast out, lest weakness poison the strong. Sarah's vision tunneled, the edges going dark as rage built in her chest like a fusion reactor reaching critical mass. And beside her stood Lyara, the council's youngest member, her pointed ears pressed flat against her silver hair, her luminescent skin pale as moonlight, her violet eyes brimming with tears. She could not shed in this place of judgment without bringing shame upon herself. Lyara's fingers trembled where they clutched the ceremonial staff of her position, and Sarah knew that her friend was dying inside, watching her people condemn a child for the crime of being born different. The human and the alien woman had served together for 3 years aboard the deep space station that orbited Varikesh Prime, first as wary colleagues, then as trusted partners, and finally, as friends who could communicate with a glance what others needed paragraphs to express. And right now Sarah could read the anguish in every line of Lyara's posture, even as the younger woman maintained the neutral expression her role demanded. The judgment continued, each council member adding their voice to the condemnation, speaking of genetic weakness, of the sacred duty to maintain warrior strength, of how Koreth's mother had shamed herself by attempting to hide his condition for so long. Sarah's research background kicked in automatically, her mind cataloging facts like a defense against feeling. The Varikesh had evolved on a high-gravity world where only the strong survived, their pack structures built on physical prowess and combat ability, their entire civilization shaped by the necessity of strength. But they had also evolved past that world, hadn't they? They flew between stars now, built cities that touched the clouds, created art and music and poetry that moved souls across species barriers. Why did strength still have to mean the ability to tear an enemy apart with your bare claws? Sarah watched little Koreth sway on his feet, exhaustion and fear finally breaking through his brave facade. And she remembered the file she had read just that morning, the medical report that had triggered this tribunal. The cub had a genetic condition, a mutation that affected bone density and muscle development, making him fragile by Varikesh standards, but not sick, not dying, not suffering, except for the cruelty of being measured against a standard he could never meet. He was small, yes, but the cognitive tests showed intelligence off the charts, problem-solving abilities that put adult Varikesh to shame, and a gift for mathematics that had his tutors calling him prodigy. Before the genetic screening came back, none of that mattered here, in this hall, where tradition weighed heavier than logic, where the old ways still held power despite the new worlds the Varikesh had joined. Lyara stood, robes falling around her like shadows given form. And Sarah felt the moment approach like a blade descending toward a neck. Let it be recorded, the High Arbiter declared, that Koreth, son of Mirella, has been examined by this council and found unfit to bear the name of Varikesh. He shall be removed from the protection of the pack, denied the rights of citizenship, and cast into the outer territories where weakness finds its natural end. The words were a death sentence dressed in bureaucratic language. Exile to regions where a small, defenseless cub would last perhaps a day before the wilderness or the lawless consumed him. And Sarah felt something inside her break, like ice calving from a glacier. She had spent her entire career following orders, respecting cultural differences, maintaining the delicate diplomatic balance between humanity and the dozens of species they now shared the stars with. But there were some lines she could not watch others cross without crossing a line of her own. Her hand moved to her collar before her conscious mind finished the thought, fingers finding the twin stars that marked her rank as commander of the Joint Species Integration Program, the position she had sacrificed a decade to earn, the role that gave her a voice in matters most humans never even learned about. Beside her, Lyara's head turned just slightly, violet, eyes going wide as she realized what Sarah was about to do. And the alien woman's lips formed a single silent word, don't. But Sarah had made her decision in the heartbeat between one breath and the next, had weighed everything she would lose against what she could not live with, and found that some prices were worth paying. I invoke right of challenge. Sarah's voice cut through the hall like a ship's horn through fog, clear and undeniable, and the assembled crowd went silent as every Varikesh present turned to stare at the human who had just spoken words that should never come from an outsider's mouth. Right of challenge was ancient law, older than the council itself, a provision that allowed any citizen to contest a judgment by offering themselves in place of the condemned, tying their fate to the one they defended. It was meant for warriors to save battlefield companions, for parents to protect offspring, for mates to shield each other from unjust punishment, but the law said citizen. And 3 years ago, the Varikesh had granted Sarah honorary citizenship in recognition of her work mediating the trade agreements that now enrich their world. She saw the calculation flash across Velshare's face, the High Arbiter searching for a way to deny the human's right. But law was law, and the Varikesh prided themselves on honoring their codes even when inconvenient. You would tie your fate to the unfit? Velshare's voice dripped with disdain. You understand that if you cannot prove his worth, you share in his exile, stripped of rank and honor, cast out alongside him. Sarah felt every eye in the chamber upon her, felt the weight of the moment like gravity increasing, felt Lyara's desperate mental plea for her to reconsider. But she walked forward anyway, boots echoing on stone, until she stood beside Koreth, looking down at a small face streaked with tears and disbelief. I understand perfectly, Sarah said, and her hands found her collar again, pulled the rank insignia free. Let the silver stars fall to the stone floor with a clatter that sounded like thunder in the silence. And I remove my rank freely, because any system that calls this child unworthy is a system I want no part of. The gasp that went through the crowd was almost physical, shock rolling through the assembled Varikesh like a wave. And Sarah felt a fierce joy burn through her fear because she had finally said what needed saying instead of hiding behind diplomatic language and cultural sensitivity. She had watched injustice wear a crown of tradition for too long, had smiled and nodded, while her soul screamed at the things she could not change. But this was one thing, one child, one moment where she could stand for what was right instead of what was politically expedient. Little Koreth looked up at her with eyes too large in his small face, silver gray like his fur, and whispered, "Why?" It was the question that broke her heart and healed it simultaneously. Because in that single word was everything she had been asking herself through 3 years of witnessing practices she disagreed with but could not influence. Why do you care? Why risk everything? Why would an outsider sacrifice her future for a stranger's child? Sarah knelt, bringing herself to the cub's eye level, and placed a gentle hand on his small shoulder, feeling him tremble like a leaf in a storm. Because you matter, she told him simply. And anyone who says different is wrong. She stood again, turning to face the council, and found Lyara staring at her with an expression that mixed horror and admiration in equal measure, tears now running freely down the alien woman's luminescent cheeks, despite the shame it would bring her. Commander Chen, Velshare's voice was ice-given sound. You are human, not Varikesh. You cannot understand the necessities of our bloodline, the importance of maintaining strength. Your species had the luxury of building civilization without predators at your backs. We did not. Every generation that weakens is a generation that invites extinction. Sarah met the High Arbiter's gaze without flinching, and when she spoke, her voice carried to every corner of the hall. You're right that I'm human. And yes, we built our civilization differently. But I know something about strength that maybe you've forgotten. She paused, letting the words settle, aware that she had perhaps seconds before they silenced her forever. Strength isn't just muscle and claw. Strength is continuing when everything tells you to quit. Strength is standing for others when you could save yourself by staying silent. And strength is evolving beyond the limitations of your past instead of clinging to them like drowning sailors clutching debris. She gestured to Koreth. the small cub who was now staring at her like she was something mythical. This child has stood in this hall alone, facing exile and death, and he hasn't run or begged or compromised who he is. That's a kind of strength your tests can't measure. The words hung in the air like a challenge. And Sarah knew she was burning every bridge she had built, destroying relationships forged through years of patient work. But she also knew that Lyara was listening. And through Lyara, perhaps others who had doubted in silence. The alien woman stood frozen at her place among the council, her staff still clutched in white-knuckled hands, her violet eyes locked on Sarah with an intensity that made the human's breath catch. They had never spoken of the connection between them. The way conversations lingered longer than necessary. The way touches during collaborative work seemed to carry electric current. The way Sarah's heart rate increased when Lyara entered a room. But it was there nonetheless, unacknowledged but undeniable. And now Sarah was watching that potential future crumble in real time. Lyara stood, her considerable height making her tower over the assembly. And Sarah recognized the body language of someone about to deliver a final judgment. You speak of strength you cannot comprehend, human. Very well. Let us test this theory. The High Arbiter's smile was not kind. You have invoked right of challenge and renounced your rank. By our law, you and the cub Koreth are now bound together, and you have 30 days to prove his worth to this council. If you fail, you will both be exiled to the Ashland territories, stripped of citizenship, protection, and resources. You will have nothing but each other and whatever strength you claim to possess. The High Arbiter leaned forward, claws scraping stone. And understand this, Sarah Chen, we do not grade on curves or make allowances for disadvantage. Koreth must demonstrate the same capabilities we demand of any Varikesh his age, physical trials included. If you have truly tied your fate to his, then you had better hope your words about different kinds of strength carry more weight than I suspect. The gavel fell. The sound final as a closing door, and the council began to disperse, leaving Sarah standing beside a trembling cub in a hall that suddenly felt cavernous and cold. She felt the reality of what she had done settle onto her shoulders like a weight. Felt the fear she had suppressed come roaring back, felt her knees go weak with the understanding that she had just bet everything on a principle she hoped was true, but could not prove. Then Lyara was there, having descended from the council platform so quickly. Her robes were still settling around her, her pointed ears pressed back in distress, her luminescent skin flushed with emotion. You fool, Lyara breathed, but her hands were gentle as they gripped Sarah's arms. You beautiful, impossible fool. Do you understand what you've done? Sarah laughed, the sound brittle with suppressed panic. Ended my career, and possibly my life? Yeah, I'm getting that picture pretty clearly now. She looked down at Koreth, who was staring up at both women with confusion and hope warring across his small face. But I couldn't just stand there and watch. I couldn't. Lyara's violet eyes searched Sarah's face like she was trying to memorize features she might never see again. And when she spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. Then I'm a fool too, because I should have been the one to stand with him. He's my people, my responsibility, and I sat there silent because I was afraid of losing my position. My voice, she cut herself off, but Sarah heard everything in that pause. All the unspoken things that had built between them over 3 years of careful distance. I cannot challenge as you did. The law forbids council members from invoking that right, but I can help you prepare. I can teach you what Koreth needs to learn. Show you the tests he must pass. Her grip tightened on Sarah's arms, urgent and desperate. Let me help you, please. Let me be brave now, even though I wasn't before. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes, felt the loneliness of the last few minutes ease just slightly, felt something warm bloom in her chest despite the cold fear. You're already brave, she told Lyara softly. You cry for those you cannot save. That's not weakness. She covered one of Lyara's hands with her own, felt the alien woman's fingers thread through hers, felt the touch communicate everything, their words carefully avoided. But yes, we'll need all the help we can get, because I have approximately zero idea how to prepare a 6-year-old for warrior trials. He's physically incapable of passing. Koreth tugged at Sarah's uniform jacket, and when she looked down his eyes were clearer, some of the fear replaced by curiosity. Are you really going to help me? He asked in his small, soft voice. Even though I'm weak? Sarah knelt again, keeping one hand linked with Lyara's and used her free hand to tilt Koreth's chin up. You're not weak, you're different, and different is only bad if you let others define what strength means. She smiled, hoping it looked more confident than she felt. "We have 30 days to show the council what you can do instead of what you can't. Think you're up for that?" The cub's answering smile was tentative but real, and Sarah felt her heart clench at the trust being placed in her by someone so small and vulnerable. They left the hall together, an unlikely trio, bound by choice and circumstance. And Sarah felt eyes following them through the corridors, heard whispers chase their footsteps, felt the weight of judgment and curiosity press against her back. Lyara walked close enough that their shoulders brushed, and every touch felt like an anchor, grounding Sarah when panic threatened to overwhelm her practical thinking. They reached Lyara's quarters in the council complex. Rooms decorated with the beautiful austerity typical of Varikesh design, all clean lines and natural materials. And Lyara immediately began pulling reference materials from her archives, her fingers flying over holographic displays as she compiled information. "The trials are traditionally physical," she explained, her voice taking on the clipped efficiency she used when processing complex problems. "Strength tests, agility courses, combat simulations against training drones. Koreth cannot hope to match his age mates in these areas." She pulled up footage of previous trials, showing Varikesh cubs leaping over obstacles, scaling walls, fighting with the natural ferocity of their species. But there are historical precedents for alternative demonstrations of value. Warriors who lost limbs but proved themselves through strategy, elders who could no longer fight but excelled in other domains. The law allows for accommodation if we can argue Koreth's case properly. Sarah studied the screens, her tactical mind engaging despite her emotional turmoil, sorting possibilities and discarding impossibilities. "So we need to reframe what the trials are testing. Not raw physical power, but capability, contribution, potential value to the pack." She turned to Koreth, who sat on a cushion, looking small and lost. "What are you good at, besides math? What do you love doing?" The cub's face brightened slightly. "I like puzzles and building things, and I can remember anything I see, like pictures in my head." Sarah and Lyara exchanged glances, and Sarah saw her own realization reflected in the alien woman's violet eyes. "Eidetic memory," Sarah murmured. Combined with advanced spatial reasoning and mathematical ability, she began to pace, pieces falling into place like a tactical solution emerging from chaos. "The Varikesh value strength because historically it meant survival, right? But you're a spacefaring species now. What if we could show that Koreth's abilities contribute to survival in modern contexts more effectively than raw combat skills?" Lyara's pointed ears perked forward, hope lighting her features. "The council respects practical demonstration. If Koreth could solve problems that typical warriors cannot, if he could prove his mind offers strategic advantages." She trailed off, fingers already moving across screens, searching legal precedents and historical cases. Sarah felt momentum building, felt the paralysis of fear give way to the clarity of having a plan, even a desperate one. "Then we don't try to make him pass warrior trials. We show them a different kind of trial, one suited to his strengths, and we argue that the pack needs builders and thinkers as much as fighters." She knelt beside Koreth again, and this time her smile was genuine. "How would you like to show the council what that amazing brain of yours can do?" The next 30 days blurred into a desperate flurry of preparation, training, and legal maneuvering that pushed all three of them to their absolute limits. Sarah discovered that Koreth's gifts were even more remarkable than initial tests suggested. The cub could glance at complex engineering schematics and identify flaws that certified technicians missed, could solve navigation problems that stumped ships' computers, could see patterns in data that remained invisible to others. She built training scenarios around his strengths, working 18-hour days to construct challenges that would impress the council while remaining achievable for a 6-year-old, however brilliant. Lyara became their bridge to Varikesh culture and law, finding obscure precedents buried in centuries of tradition, crafting legal arguments that walk the razor's edge between innovation and apostasy. She worked in secret, hiding her involvement from the other council members, who would have seen her assistance as betrayal, and the strain showed in the shadows under her eyes and the tightness around her mouth. But in the stolen moments between preparation sessions, when Koreth slept and the night grew deep, Sarah and Lyara would sit together in comfortable silence, shoulders touching, fingers occasionally brushing, and the connection between them grew stronger in the way of things tested by adversity. "I'm terrified," Sarah admitted one night, the words slipping out past her carefully maintained confidence. What if I'm wrong? What if I've destroyed both our futures chasing an idealistic notion that doesn't match reality? Lyara's hand found hers in the darkness, squeezed gently. Then we'll face that failure together. And know we tried to change something that needed changing. She paused, then added softly. I've spent 3 years watching you move through our world like light through crystal, illuminating things we'd stopped seeing. You make me want to be braver, Sarah Chen. Whatever happens in that hall, I don't regret finding that courage, even belatedly. Sarah turned to look at her friend's face in the dim light, saw vulnerability and strength mixed in equal measure, and felt her heart make a decision her mind had been avoiding for months. When this is over, she said quietly, when we've either won or been exiled, I want to tell you something I should have said a long time ago. Lyara's luminescent skin seemed to glow brighter, and her violet eyes held emotions that made Sarah's breath catch. When this is over, Lyara promised, I want to hear it, and perhaps say some things of my own. The moment stretched between them, full of potential and longing, and then Lyara smiled, pressed her forehead briefly against Sarah's in the Varikesh gesture of deep affection, and they returned to work with renewed determination. The day of judgment arrived like an execution date, inevitable and terrifying, and Sarah stood once again in the great hall, with Koreth at her side, facing the assembled council. Velshara looked down at them with an expression that suggested she had already composed their exile orders. 30 days have passed, the High Arbiter announced. Present your proof of worth. Sarah took a deep breath, squeezed Koreth's small hand, and stepped forward. Honored Council, we do not come to demonstrate the cub's ability to match warrior standards he was not designed to meet. We come to prove that the pack requires diversity of strength, and that dismissing those who serve differently is weakness disguised as purity. She gestured, and Lyara activated the holographic displays they had spent weeks preparing, showing complex scenarios. Before you are 3 problems currently facing Varikesh society: the instability in the orbital docks tether system, the navigation errors that have delayed merchant ships, and the resource allocation puzzle that has created supply shortages in the outer colonies. Military engineers have worked on these for months without solutions. I submit that Koreth can solve all 3 within the hour. The council members shifted, interest breaking through their predetermined judgment, because all 3 problems were real, expensive, and embarrassing to a culture that prided itself on engineering excellence. Velshara's eyes narrowed. You claim a cub can accomplish what our finest minds cannot? Sarah met her gaze steadily. I claim that different kinds of intelligence serve different purposes, and wisdom lies in recognizing all forms of strength. She looked down at Koreth, who nodded with a determination that made him seem far older than his years. Show them, Sarah said softly. What followed was perhaps the most tense hour of Sarah's life, watching a small cub work through problems with a holographic interface specially modified for his size. His small hands moving with precision while his mind processed information at speeds that made the monitoring equipment flag his neural activity as anomalous. The council watched in silence as Koreth identified the harmonic frequency causing the tether instability, mapped a navigation solution that accounted for variables the computers had been programmed to ignore, and restructured the resource allocation using an algorithm that somehow optimized for 17 different factors simultaneously. When he finished, the small cub swayed with exhaustion, and Sarah caught him, lifting him into her arms, where he fit like a child, a fraction of his actual intelligence. 23 minutes, Lyara announced, her voice carefully neutral, but her eyes shining with pride. All 3 solutions verified as viable by preliminary analysis. The hall erupted in whispers, council members conferring in urgent undertones, and Sarah held Koreth close, feeling him tremble with fatigue and stress, and prayed to gods. She didn't believe in that this would be enough. Velshara stood, and the hall went silent, all eyes on the High Arbiter whose decision would determine 2 fates. What you have shown us is impressive, she admitted, and Sarah felt hope flare bright. But it changes nothing. The hope died as quickly as it had been born. Intelligence alone does not sustain a bloodline. Combat strength, physical prowess, the ability to defend territory, these are the foundations of Varikesh survival. One cub's clever mind cannot compensate for genetic weakness that will propagate if allowed to continue. Sarah felt rage build in her chest, felt the injustice of it like a physical pain, and she opened her mouth to deliver an argument she knew would fail. But Lyara moved first. The alien woman stood from her council seat, descended the platform just as she had 30 days before. But this time she did not stop beside Sarah. She walked to stand before Velshara, before the entire council, and when she spoke, her voice carried quiet devastation. "Then you will exile me as well," Lyara said, "because I renounce my position and invoke the same right of challenge that Sarah Chen claimed. If Koreth is unworthy, then I who support him am unworthy. If his intelligence means nothing to this council, then my voice means nothing. I will not sit in judgment over a people who cannot evolve beyond their fears." She removed her council medallion, let it fall to the stone with a sound like breaking glass. And Sarah felt her heart stop because Lyara was Varikesh. This was her world, her culture, her entire life. "You cannot exile us all," Lyara continued, and her eyes swept the hall, landing on faces Sarah recognized from the whispered support network Lyara had mentioned. Allies who agreed in private but feared public stance. "How many of the young must we cast out before we acknowledge that our species has changed? How many brilliant minds, how many gentle souls, how many who could contribute differently, must we destroy to maintain a purity that no longer serves us?" One by one, like stars emerging at dusk, other Varikesh stood, first a handful, then dozens, then hundreds from the assembled crowd. They came forward silently, standing in ranks behind Lyara and Koreth, and Sarah realized with shocking clarity that they had tapped into something much larger than one cub's fate. This was a generational divide that had been building for years, the tension between old ways and new possibilities, and Koreth had become the symbol around which change could finally crystallize. Velshara stared at the assembled crowd, at council members who now looked uncertain, at the rebellion forming in her hall of tradition, and Sarah saw calculation war with conviction across the High Arbiter's face. "You would overturn 1,000 years of careful genetic selection for one individual?" Velshara demanded. "You would weaken everything we have built?" Lyara's response was steady and sure. "I would strengthen what we are building by recognizing that we are more than the planet that forged us. We travel between stars now. We face challenges our ancestors never imagined. We need warriors, yes, but also engineers and mathematicians and healers and artists and dreamers. We need all the strength we can nurture, in whatever forms it takes." She reached back without looking, and Sarah took her hand, felt Lyara's fingers grip hers with desperate hope, felt the connection between them sing with shared purpose. "The question before this council is not whether Koreth is fit by old measures, but whether we are wise enough to create new ones." The silence that followed felt alive with potential, and Sarah watched Velshara's certainty crack, watched the other council members exchange glances, watched the mathematics of politics shift in real time. Finally, the High Arbiter sat heavily, looking older than before, and when she spoke, her voice carried the weariness of someone watching the world change. "Despite their resistance, the council will deliberate," she announced. "All parties will await our decision." The wait lasted 3 hours that felt like 3 years, time moving in strange stutters, while Sarah paced a small antechamber, with Lyara silent beside her, and Koreth asleep against her shoulder, exhausted by stress and effort. When the summons came, Sarah's hands were shaking so badly that Lyara had to help her straighten her uniform, and the touch of the alien woman's fingers was the only thing keeping Sarah anchored to reality. They entered the hall together, 3 people bound by choice, facing judgment they could not control, and Sarah felt every eye upon them like physical weight. Velshara stood, and her expression was unreadable. "The council has debated long and with great difficulty," the High Arbiter said. "What you ask requires us to reconsider principles we have held sacred for generations. It is not a decision we make lightly." Sarah held her breath, held Koreth closer, felt Lyara's hand find hers again. "But neither can we ignore the demonstration before us, nor the will of so many who stand in support. Therefore, the council rules thus: Koreth, son of Mirella, shall retain his citizenship and pack membership, but with the understanding that his path will differ from traditional warriors. He will be trained according to his strengths, and his contributions evaluated by measures appropriate to his abilities." The relief that flooded through Sarah nearly buckled her knees, but Velshara was not finished. "Furthermore, the council acknowledges that our laws must evolve as our people do. A committee will be formed to review our evaluation standards and create accommodation for diverse forms of strength." The human Sarah Chen and the council member Lyara, who renounced her position, are both invited to serve on this committee, should they wish their voices heard in shaping our future, Sarah stared, unable to process that they had not only won, but had been offered a path forward, and beside her Lyara made a sound between a laugh and a sob, relief and joy mixing into something incandescent. Koreth stirred in Sarah's arms, looked up with sleepy eyes, and asked, "Can I stay?" Sarah felt tears track down her face as she nodded. "You can stay. You can stay and be exactly who you are, and they're going to help make a world where that's enough." The cub's smile was pure sunshine, innocent and bright, and Sarah set him down gently so he could run to his mother, who waited in the crowd, desperate and hopeful. She watched the reunion through tears, watched Koreth disappear into his mother's embrace, watched the impossible made real through stubbornness and principle and luck. And then Lyara was turning, her violet eyes shining with emotions that made Sarah's heart race. "You were going to tell me something," Lyara whispered. When this was over, Sarah laughed, the sound shaky with reaction and relief. "I was going to tell you that I'm completely impossibly in love with you, and have been for longer than I want to admit. And watching you stand up today just made it worse." She reached up, cupped Lyara's face gently, marveling at the luminescent warmth of her skin. "I know we're from different species, different worlds, and there are probably 1,000 complications, but I can't keep pretending I don't feel this way." Lyara's smile was radiant, transforming her features into something that made Sarah forget to breathe. "Then it's fortunate," the alien woman said softly, "that I was going to say the same thing, and that I've spent 3 years trying to find the courage to bridge the distance between us." She leaned forward slowly, giving Sarah every opportunity to pull back. But Sarah met her halfway, and their lips touched, gentle as starlight, tender as first snow, perfect as a promise kept. The kiss was brief and chaste, nothing inappropriate for the public space they occupied, but it carried everything they had been too afraid to acknowledge. And when they parted, Sarah felt like the world had shifted on its axis, revealing new possibilities, where before there had been only duty and distance. Around them, the hall was emptying, people returning to their lives, carrying the news that something fundamental had changed, and Sarah knew that the real work was just beginning. Committees to serve on, policies to shape, a relationship to navigate between species and cultures, and 1,000 potential complications. But she also knew that she had found something worth fighting for, not just in the principle that had driven her to stand beside a condemned cub, but in the connection forged through shared values and mutual courage with a woman who made her believe in possibilities larger than herself. Lyara took her hand again, threading their fingers together in a gesture that was becoming familiar and precious, and led her toward the hall's exit, where sunlight streamed through crystalline walls. "I should tell you," Lyara said with a smile, that held warmth and mischief, "that my family is going to have many questions about the human who corrupted their daughter's sense of propriety." Sarah laughed, feeling lighter than she had in months, feeling the future open up before her full of challenge and wonder. "And my mother is going to be insufferably smug that I finally found someone, and will absolutely make a production of visiting an alien world to meet you." They stepped out into the sunlight together, into a world they had helped change just slightly, into a future they could not predict, but would face together, and Sarah thought that perhaps this was what strength really meant: not standing unmovable against change, but having the courage to evolve, to grow, to choose principle over comfort and love over fear, to believe that the smallest among them mattered just as much as the strongest, and that measuring worth required wisdom more than tradition. 3 months later, Sarah stood in a newly established education center for Varikesh youth of diverse abilities, watching Koreth explain engineering principles to a class of students who hung on his every word, and she felt pride warm her chest like sunlight. The cub had grown in confidence and capability, becoming a symbol of the changes spreading through Varikesh society, and though resistance remained from traditionalists, momentum was building toward a more inclusive future. Beside her, Lyara reviewed curriculum proposals with the efficiency that characterized all her work, and Sarah found herself watching the alien woman's profile instead of the reports, marveling that this brilliant, compassionate, infuriatingly stubborn person had chosen to tie her fate to a human who had nothing to offer but principles and devotion. As if sensing the attention, Lyara looked up, caught Sarah staring, and raised one elegant eyebrow. "If you have finished admiring me, we have 17 more proposals to review before the committee meeting." Sarah grinned, unrepentant. "I can multitask." Look, I'm thinking about educational policy and how beautiful you are simultaneously. Lyara's luminescent skin flushed with color, and she shook her head, but her smile was soft with affection. You are incorrigible. You love it, Sarah countered. And Lyara's response was to lean over and kiss her, quick and sweet, before returning to her reports with a smile that made Sarah's heart sing. They had built something here, something that started with one moment of standing for what was right and had grown into a movement, a relationship, a future neither of them could have predicted. And as Sarah watched Koreth teach, watched students of all ability levels learn that their worth was not measured by someone else's standard, watched Lyara fight with quiet determination to reshape the world for the better, she thought that maybe this was the real meaning of strength, not the power to tear down, but the courage to build up, not the ability to stand alone, but the wisdom to stand together. And she would not trade this complicated, challenging, beautiful life for anything the universe had to offer.